Len Montgomery, and I am one of your speakers and also the MC for this event. I'm the Public Lands Campaign Director with Environment America, and we're really excited to be here. This is part of a series of webinars doing a deeper dive into threats to our forests across the country. We'll take questions from the audience. You can use the Q&A function in Zoom at any time throughout the chat, and then we'll answer questions at the end. So I want to start with a quick overview of what we're trying to recover and protect. You've probably heard of an old growth forest, but what does that really mean? So there are a couple structural things to look out for if you're figuring out whether a forest is an old growth forest or not. So has the forest developed naturally while recovering from natural disturbances like fires? An old growth forest will have a diversity of tree species, sizes, and ages. It will also have standing and fallen dead trees and a diversity of understory plants. So that's kind of the bottom layer, and healthy soil. And old growth forests provide habitat for a diversity of insects, birds, and other wildlife. And these are a couple good pictures of some beautiful old growth forests. They're dynamic. Disturbances are always changing things. So a healthy old growth forest is not just big trees, but also the processes and structures that help support the pieces of the ecosystem. And it can take over 100 years or significantly longer to achieve this. There aren't that many forests or areas of forest that are over 100 years old. And so our effort is focused not only on protecting what remains, but on recovering what was lost. So we're calling for protections of forests and stands that are 80 years old so that they can grow into old growth. Sometimes you hear that forests are being replanted, but unfortunately, replanting often results in what we call a plantation, which is not a functional ecosystem or a functional forest. You can see from this photo, these trees are all about the same size. They look like they're probably the same species and the same age. This is not really a forest. So why do we want to protect and regrow our old growth? There are a lot of reasons, but the big one we're focused on is as a climate solution. Older, bigger trees capture and store more carbon. Zach will talk more about this, but bottom line, our older trees are the most effective carbon capture technology we have available, and all we have to do is let them grow. In addition to helping slow climate change, they'll also help us adapt. So mature and old growth forests will help safeguard biodiversity and provide refuge for climate change. They'll help reduce flood and erosion risk. They increase the availability of drinking water for communities that might be struggling with drought impacts that have been made worse by climate change. And they also have features that make them actually more resistant to fire. So they'll help us actually adapt to climate change as it is happening. There are many other co-benefits as well, including cultural use, outdoor recreation, and the mental and spiritual well-being that so many of us achieve from actually spending time, walking through the trees or just sitting under them. But you're all here to learn about New England's forests. And so I'd actually like to turn it over to my fellow panelists. And I want to first introduce Rich Holshoe with the Atui Project. And he's going to tell us a little bit more about what that is and why the forests are so important.
Leonie, Len, thank you. Hello, everybody. Kwai. My name is Rich Holshoe. I am the founder and co-director at Atui Project. Atui Project is a cultural outreach organization recently founded to face the public and help us to learn together about many of the stories that you may not be familiar with. And we are also here to build capacity and support the contemporary Native communities here in what we know as New England, specifically in Abenaki country, Abenaki country, the homelands, what are known as Ndakina, our land. Atui is a word in the Abenaki language, which means together in space and time, and it describes where we are, you and I are right now, where we all are, and what is confronting us. We do need to talk about this and deal with it, specifically climate change, our relationship with each other, with this place that we live in. And that's the work that we are involved in. So thank you for being here. We're at atui.org, ATOWI, atui.org. This is our landing page on the web. And if you see this, you've arrived. So I hope you check that out. You can also follow us on Facebook at Atui and on Instagram at Atui. So I am not going to use a whole bunch of slides here. I'm going to talk with you. I enjoy sharing with folks, telling stories. Everything is a story, and there are many stories, all occurring simultaneously, some of which you may know and some of which you may not know. But I think to the degree that we do know and we understand better, we can make better decisions, which again brings us to why we are here today speaking with you. There have been decisions made in the past, values and policies in place that have led us to the point that we find ourselves in, with things changing in a less than helpful way. So here we are in Ndakina, the homelands of the Abenaki people. They basically overlap quite well with northern New England as we know it today. Most of the state of Vermont, all of New Hampshire, northern Massachusetts, western Maine, and even up over the current international border into southern Quebec. The lands of the Abenaki, the Dawn Land people. This is the first place where the sun strikes when it comes up every morning. So we are in the Dawn Land, Wombanaki. I think what I want to do here is to sort of set the stage and look at the fact that while we were in the midst of responding to these crises that seem to be popping up all around us constantly, we're in this reactionary mood. We are under stress. We are concerned. We are worried. We're trying to figure out what to do, and what we may have a really hard time keeping in mind is what is it? What is the resting state? What is the balance state? What is our point of reference here? Rather than trying to mitigate all the time and to respond and adapt, we need to look at why these things are happening. And that is informed by the values and the choices that have been made through Western society, through the practices that we have in place, dealing with land. Land is not a commodity from an Indigenous point of view. We do not own the land. That is the legal structure that we operate within right now. But flip it on its head, the land owns us. And when that is the case, you are going to respond differently. There is a degree of responsibility inherent in that. We look at the land and everything that is here as our family, as our relations. You hear the phrase, all of our relations, and that is very true. When you give agency and personhood to everyone around you, and by that I include the trees and the understory and the animals and other plants that are there, the ones you see, the ones you can't see, they all matter, and we are responsible to them. And that should be the resting state. That should be the reference point. But we tend to focus on the human element. We are completely anthropocentric. And so we look at things in terms of resources, in terms of dollars, ultimately, in terms of power, energy. These are all interchangeable words for the same concept. I prefer to look at that as spirit, and spirit should be honored, and it should be respected and acknowledged. And when we look at going into the forest as being with our family, it's going to change the way that you approach the entire paradigm. And it's not in terms of merely mitigating or adapting. It's recognizing that the values that inform these behaviors are what's at the heart of it. And we need to examine those as well, or it's just going to be more of the same, but perhaps slowed down, or a different color on a different day. It's going to continue. It's going to continue to degrade. In all of this talk about energy transition, for example, all we are doing is fuel switching. We are still consuming. There is no change in behavior. We've just done it. We're just doing it in a different way. And there's more and more and more of it. It's still a constant growth curve that needs to change. These are values that are held by indigenous people who have been here in northern New England for 12,000 years. And that speaks directly to sustainability. 12,000 years. We don't need to focus on technological innovations or anything like that, because all of the innovations in the world at the end of the day, if they lead you down a path toward darkness, what good are they? We need the values. We need the understandings. So when I think of going into the forest, particularly an old forest, I think in terms of being able to access a place or places where these cultural values, these original cultural values were formed, where they were learned by all of those around you, from all of those around you. And there is a holism there. There's a reference point there. We need these places to remind us of our responsibilities and of the way that it should be. If they're all gone, if we continue to use them for power, money, energy, we're not going to have that. And quite literally, we're going to be destitute in our souls, in our spirit. These things are real. We are human beings. We are not machines. We have hearts, we have souls, we have minds. We need to fill them with a way of being in the world, and we need stories that stand us well, in good stead. We need to maintain these stories. We need to be able to access these stories, and these stories are found in these places. We need to have them. They deserve to be there for their own right, in and of themselves, for themselves. They have that right as well. Everything has rights, to the degree that in effect, they all become reciprocal responsibilities. We actually have no rights unless we're meeting our responsibilities. And if we're meeting our responsibilities to each other, which is forming community both with human beings and with all of our relations, those other beings, those other ones, they will meet their responsibilities for us. And our rights are there. They are preserved because we're taking care of each other as we are instructed to do. Original instructions is the word that's often used. So that's not the case here in New England. We have undergone colonization here, as the entire continent has, as the entire planet has. Colonization is the taking of whatever is present in a place for oneself. It is an act of selfishness. It's an act of greed. And if there's anything in the way, it needs to be moved out of the way. It needs to be pushed out of the way. That's the story of colonization. It's a real story. It has happened. It continues to happen because, for the most part, indigenous people are separated from their homelands, the land that owns them. They don't own that land. The land owns them, but someone else has taken it for themselves. We need to restore these relationships. We need to recognize them, acknowledge them, and then we need to do something about it, because words are where it begins. It starts with that putting it out there with the words, with the vibration, that act of creation. And then we need to follow it with actions. We need to back it up with what we're going to do. Here in New England, as we know it today, the Green Mountain National Forest, the White Mountain National Forest, basically completely overlap with Indakina, the homelands for the Abenaki people. We have this opportunity. We have the ability to realize a portion of this original concept that these are lands held in common for everyone's good. And when I say everyone, it's not just the people. These are public lands. They should not be there for private profit or for simply turning into dollars and products and commodities. They're here for all of us. And again, all of us, human and other than human. And we have this opportunity, and totally, Zach will be talking about this. The science backs this up. This is the highest and best use for these places. We need to allow that. We need to recognize that. We need to put our actions as human beings, this free will, this ability to make decisions that we are vested with, into action and do the right thing. It has always been the right thing. If you have been in place with your culture for 12,000 years, you are sustainable by definition. However, the colonized presence on this continent only been here for 300 or 400 years, depending on where you are. And the evidence of that and the impact of that is highly visible, and it is not sustainable. We need to move in that direction, not just adapt and change and mitigate. We need to move back in that direction toward balance. The operative word here is balance. Move back toward balance. If you don't decide to do something yourself with your ability to make a difference, starting with the individual and with those next to you, you are not putting that energy into the tendency toward chaos, toward entropy. A system will continue to disintegrate unless you try to do something about it. And that's your choice. I ask you to exercise your choice. Make good choices for everyone's here, who is here. Yourself, the next 7 generations, and for all of our relations. These are traditional teachings. They work. They've held up for so long because of that. And reach out in the area where you are. Find out who the original people are. Talk with them. Let them have their voice, the voice that they have not been given, that's been taken away. And give voice to those trees, to that understory, to those birds. Let them have their voice as well. And let's take care of our mother. And I don't say that just to be cutesy. It is our mother. Nothing, people produce nothing. We literally produce nothing. We are consumers. We are at the top of that pyramid. Everything that we take in, and we take it all in, is coming from somewhere else, from the animals, the plants, from the sun, ultimately, from our mother. These are gifts, and we should be grateful, and we should act in that manner. These are decisions that are within our ability to make. Support them. Put your vote, put your voice, put your choice behind these decisions that can be made. Preserve, conserve, protect, allow old growth forests, public lands to be themselves, because it's for the good of all of us, and it's for the good of them, and it's the right thing to do. I'm going to let Zach put the numbers behind all of this. It's quite clear once you look at this. You may not be familiar with some of these facts because they're not put out there. They don't serve the greater narrative, the economic growth narrative, but they're true. They're obvious, they're apparent. So I'm going to turn this over to Zach Porter. Have at it, Zach.
Thanks, Rich. I'm so grateful to Rich for joining us today, and grateful to Rich for being a source of wisdom, knowledge, information that I've just been so grateful to come upon since moving back to New England, where I grew up but moved away from for quite a while. I'm Zach Porter. I'm the executive director and one of the many co-founders of Standing Trees, a group that came together a couple of years ago to put forward a new vision for New England's public lands at a time when we know more than we've ever known that we need to put our public lands on a new path. So many of us have seen that there wasn't a voice for recovering the natural forests of our region, the forests that have always been here, that were here just a short while ago, and that could one day perhaps be restored once more to our landscape. And so it's a real pleasure and honor to join you all today and to speak after Rich here. And I just love how Rich puts it in such, I think, clear, simple, stark, and rich terms. For me, and I think this is probably true for many of you, I come to this work because of a deep personal calling to do this work. My values and my ethics tell me that recovering the natural forests, the old growth forests of our region is simply the right thing to do. It's the right thing for our forests, for our ecology, for the biodiversity of our region. But as Rich just explained, it's also the right thing to do culturally as well, and to help rebuild those connections for the indigenous communities of New England, what we now call New England. And so I as I said, just as I'm sure many of you do, I come to this work in a way that I think the science really is the supporting information. And so we'll dive into that in a second, but I think it goes so much deeper than the science. And I don't think there's anybody better than Rich to lay that out for us. I love this quote. If you don't know Mary Bird Davis, look her up. She has an amazing book, Eastern Old Growth Forests, Prospects for Discovery and Recovery, or something along those lines. I might be misquoting the title a little bit, but it's a wonderful book. You can still find it. I think it's still in print, or if not, there are copies out there to track down. And this quote really just kind of sets the stage for the work that Standing Trees does. We're between two forested worlds, the natural forest of pre-European settlement North America and the recovered forest of the future. The earlier forested world is not dead. We are studying and struggling to preserve its living remnants. And we do not believe that the future forest is powerless to be born. These remnants, with our help, will become the seeds from which a renewed forest spreads. So I just love starting with that, and then we can dig into the science here. Go ahead, Sean, with the next slide. Thank you. So, I think one of the greatest dangers that our society faces, and I believe this touches on the cultural issues as well as the ecological issues, as Rich was just speaking to, is that we have this amnesia as a society. We can't remember what we don't know or what we haven't been told. We don't have a through line, a story of the landscape that was here just a short time ago, several centuries ago. We don't have the stories that we need of the rich cultures that were here before European conquest in North America. We need to recover these stories to help us know where we need to go in the future and where we can go. There is so much we don't know about the world around us. And science, of course, is, I think, just catching up to the degree of indigenous knowledge worldwide of our incredible biodiversity. This is a photo here of a wolverine track and I think a lynx track next to each other from where I lived for many years in Montana. And those are two species that used to walk side by side right here in northern New England. We haven't had wolverine here in many, many years. And wouldn't it be something if someday we could bring a species like that back to this landscape? Go ahead. So, we're living through a lot of crises right now, but three that I'll just highlight here are the extinction crisis, which is absolutely hitting New England, just as it is other parts of the world, a water quality crisis that we're all too familiar with in many parts of our region, and of course, changing weather patterns due to climate change, increasing drought, increasing flooding. And so all of these things come together in when we think about recovering our natural ecosystems. Go ahead. And I think, it's worth pointing out that I really believe we put too much emphasis, too much blame on climate change itself, because to me, climate change is something that exacerbates and lays bare our poor choices as a society. We need to be thinking about what we can do to change the way that we are relating to the land and water around us, the way that we are helping to steward those lands and waters, to better prepare us to deal with climate change, just as we are also trying to reverse climate change. We can't just point a finger at the changing climate. We have to look inward and look at the choices that we're making as a society to really make sure that we are going to be resilient to these changes in the climate, and that we can hopefully mitigate these changes that are coming our way. Go ahead. Well, it wasn't long ago when this is what northern New England looked like. These are forests. These are photos of the White Mountain National Forest, which, just like the Green Mountain National Forest and forests all over New England, was leveled throughout the 1800s and into the early 1900s. We had huge fires burning due to the slash that piled up across these forests, and then sparks from locomotives or other sources that would ignite huge fires that we can't even conceive of in New England today. So our landscape was utterly devastated, 80% deforested, quite possibly more than that in many places. And we're still recovering from that devastation today. Go ahead. We've gone from 80% deforestation to about 80% tree cover in our region, but I want to differentiate between tree cover and forest recovery, because these are terms that are used misleadingly all the time. I would hardly say that we have reforested this region, because when you look out on the trees of what we now call New England, we're not looking at forests. And I think this is incredibly important to acknowledge, so that we kind of know that what we're seeing today isn't the end point that we're looking for. It's not where we want to be. It's merely a step along the road of recovery. Most New England forests will not even begin to show the characteristics of a true natural old forest until they hit around 80 to 100 years old. That's just beginning to show those characteristics. Of course, our forests here develop on timescales of many centuries and thousands of years, to accumulate the rich structure, the complex structure that Len was talking about earlier, the standing and down dead wood, which really characterized our forests here in New England, just as they do the forests of the Pacific Northwest. That's what's unique about our moist forests here in New England, is their ability to grow for eons and to continue to take in carbon over that time and store it. So vast quantities of it. Go ahead to the next slide. Old forests are what our native species rely on in New England. And, we actually have had some pretty enlightened documents coming out of the state of Vermont recently, pointing this out, that, the closer we get to recovering old forests, the greater the likelihood that we will support our native species. So you have to wonder then, why is it that we have done so little as a society to move us towards this target? Just 3% of New England's forests are managed to someday grow old, just 3%. And today, old forests are functionally absent from the landscape. In any meaningful way, old forests are not a part of the New England landscape. You can visit a postage stamp here and a postage stamp there to give you a sense of what might have been, but as a functional forest, non-existent in our region. Go ahead. What we know too is that timber harvest is the driving factor behind the changes in our forests. We lose more carbon due to timber harvest than any other factor in New England every year. And that's why when you look at this map showing New England here, dark red is the highest amount of carbon stored above ground. Blue and grays and yellows are the least amount of above ground carbon. Look at the state of Maine. It's the most forested state in the nation, not just in New England. And it has the lowest above ground carbon of any state in New England. This is purely because of the logging history and ongoing logging in Maine. And it just points to what I think a lot of people don't want you to know, which is how much logging impacts forest carbon, forest health. It's the driving factor. If you leave our forests alone, the science says we can recover, double, maybe even 4 times the amount of carbon, store that much more carbon in our forests than we do today. And so why aren't we putting more of our forests on that path? That's the question that we're asking. Go ahead. So the forests of the Northeast store more carbon even today, regardless of that past landscape and ongoing landscape history, than the forests of the Pacific Northwest. So, or I should say, second only to the forests of the Pacific Northwest. So this map here, darker the green, the higher the amount of above ground carbon. New England is even today a critical carbon sink for the United States, but it could be so much more if we changed management at a significant scale. Go ahead. And where we've left forests to be themselves, you can see the results. Just 5% of the forest in our region stores 30% of the above ground carbon. The areas in red here are those areas that are managed as more or less, GAP 1 protected areas. These are areas that are strictly managed to prevent logging and other resource extraction. 5% of the land area stores 30% of the carbon. I just think that's incredible. And again, it's just a testament to the power of letting our forests be. Go ahead. 86% of the carbon that we lose every year is from timber harvest. It is the leading cause of tree mortality in the Northeast. Go ahead. And I want to bring it home for all of us because we have choices that we're making as a society right now that are going to impact our generation and future generations that we have the power to put a stop to today if we take action. This was a recent outing. Standing Trees walk into an area proposed for logging on the Green Mountain National Forest, the Telephone Gap Integrated Resource Project. And these are 150-year-old to 200-year-old forests that are very likely to be logged in this Telephone Gap project. Go ahead. The Green Mountain National Forest in the last just 6-7 years has approved 40,000 acres of logging, and another 10,000 acres is likely to be added to that tally if they move forward with the Telephone Gap project. This map shows areas that are currently approved for logging on the Green Mountain National Forest. In the Telephone Gap project, 55% of the stands, 55% of the project area, more or less, is over a century old, and 80% of the project area, or the stands within the project area, are over 80. So this is an exceptionally old forest by Vermont standards, where most forests don't get above 75 to 100 years old before they're cut down. And there's a 16,000 acre roadless area, really important wildland that is also likely to be logged in this project. Go ahead. And if you don't think they'll do this, well, look at what they're doing right now with a project called the Early Successional Habitat Creation Project. This is an area in the largest roadless area in Vermont, 40,000 acre roadless area, where the Forest Service is going in and logging 100 to 160-year-old forest right now. This is on the chopping block. This is called the South Fork Timber Sale, and the Forest Service is looking to move this forward within the next year or so. It's already been approved. So if we don't think that this is something that's possible with the Telephone Gap project, look again. And this is why it's so critical for the public to speak up right now when the Telephone Gap project is announced for a public comment period, which we expect will happen very soon. It could even be by the end of this week. We've been told it would happen late June. Maybe it'll happen sometime in July. But please be on the lookout and stay in touch with Standing Trees. You can get on our email list at standingtrees.org. Follow us on Facebook, and we'll keep you posted about what's going on. I think there's maybe one more, or just to say, check us out and stay in touch. And we'd love to have you get involved as a volunteer, as a comment writer. There are many ways to lend a hand. Really, you name it. We're looking for people of variety of skill sets to get involved right now and help us push back against this madness on our public lands and put our national forests here in New England on a new path. So I'm just going to close with this wonderful few lines of poetry from Mary Oliver. Instructions for living a life. Pay attention, be astonished, tell about it. So keep that awe, keep that wonder at the world around us, share it with others, and then let's motivate our friends and family to action to put our forests on a different path So thanks again for joining the webinar today.
All right, so back again, Len Montgomery. I'm the Public Lands Campaign Director with Environment America, and I'm going to talk a little bit about the political situation and our campaign. So Environment America and Standing Trees are both part of the Climate Forest Campaign, which is a national effort made up of more than 100 groups to call for a national national policy and national rule that will protect our old growth and mature trees and forests on federal lands. So I wanted to talk about a couple things that have happened recently that both give us some hope and then give us reason to think we need to work even harder. So first is on Earth Day, President Biden issued an executive order, which as you can see there, directs federal agencies, the USDA, U.S. Department of Agriculture, and U.S. Department of Interior to conduct an inventory of mature and old growth forests on America's federal lands so that policies can be adopted to protect them. This is a huge step forward. We have certainly not ever had a president acknowledge mature and old growth trees and forests as being important and important for climate. So the executive order is a first step. It's not a final step. It is a direction to the agency. So it's not a rule. It's not a law. But we still need something durable. But it's a really great start and not something that we were expecting to see quite so quickly. And as I said, it's particularly notable in that it includes the word mature, which is a very important piece of this if we're going to recover what's lost. And then it also included not just National Forest Service land, but Bureau of Land Management lands, which less a factor in New England, but very important out in the West, particularly in Oregon, where the Bureau of Land Management does manage forests. And then the biggest deal is that it talks about old forests as a climate solution, which, I think Zach has, if you weren't already convinced, hopefully Zach has convinced you. And we had not seen that before either. So we're feeling very optimistic about where, the direction that the president's executive order is moving things. But then just last week, Secretary Vilsack, who's the Secretary of Agriculture, which is the agency that houses the U.S. Forest Service, issued a secretarial memo. Again, this is not a rule, it's not a law, it's just a document that sets direction. The good news is that also acknowledging that America's forests are capturing carbon emissions, as well as many of the benefits that I discussed earlier, clean water, biodiversity, cultural resources, outdoor recreation. But the troubling piece of the secretarial memo is that it says, quote, a primary threat to old growth stands on national forests is no longer timber harvesting. So the U.S. Department of Agriculture is not looking at timber harvesting as being a threat to our climate forests or something that they're, really needing to deal with. So we have a lot of work to do, which is why I'm really glad that you're all here and hope that you can continue to be involved. So we already, after the executive order, had decided we weren't just going to sit back and let the agencies develop their policies. We were going to make sure that we had a lot to say. It's now even more important that we have a lot to say, and very important that we say a lot about logging and the threats that logging projects like the Telephone Gap Project and others across the country, the threats that those pose to our climate forests and to our carbon sinks. So we want to put a spotlight on the U.S. Department of Agriculture and the Department of Interior, one, to quickly develop a policy to protect forests and trees from threats. The slower they move, the more of these logging projects will go forward. We need to move quickly. You know, as as Zach said, we're in a climate crisis. To me, that doesn't indicate that we should take a year or 2 years to figure things out. It indicates we should move as quickly as possible. And then we want to make sure that the policy for protecting the forests includes logging and protecting them from logging, as well as other, you know, other threats. And you know, if we do this right in the United States, this could stand as a global model for forest protection and put the US in a leadership role, you know, nationally or internationally as we deal with deforestation and degradation issues across the globe. So how to get involved. Again, we can't simply leave the future of our old growth and mature forests in the hands of the same federal agencies who've spent decades approving projects to cut them down. It's time for us to ratchet up the pressure. So we want to mobilize hundreds of thousands of people across the country to continue to call on the president and the administration to introduce lasting, durable protections to mature and old growth forests from the threat of logging. And the very first step that you can take is to sign our petition on the Climate Forest Coalition website. From there, we'll be able to contact you and give you more opportunities to get involved. Also suggest that you follow Environment America or Environment Massachusetts, Environment Connecticut, whichever is your state environment group, as well as Standing Trees, to keep an eye out for alerts for future opportunities to take action, you know, whether it's attending events, attending phone banks, writing letters to the editor, meeting with elected officials, and so on. We've got a lot of work, and we're excited to have all of you be part of it. So I am going to stop the screen share here, and I think we are ready to take questions. So I think, let's see. Looks like we've only got 2 so far. So if people have brilliant questions or not brilliant questions, feel free to there's things you're curious about, to go ahead and use the icon is labeled Q&A, and it has 2 little speech bubbles, and it should be at the very bottom of your Zoom screen. Okay, so Rich, there's a question for you from Marina. So she says, thank you so much for the clarity of your voice. Do you have a sense of how the latest ruling by the Supreme Court that essentially cuts indigenous sovereignty by giving US states legal power over tribal nations impacts environmental justice and old growth protection work?
Yeah, so that's kind of a big deal. That decision just happened in the last day or two. It kind of reverses or deeply impacts the body of federal Indian law, as it's called. It's been developed over a long period of time. The current court's makeup is pointing toward this direction, and so we kind of are looking at it like a doubling down on colonization, where the federal government, which has taken this power for itself to administer relationships with Native nations, is now removing some of that from Congress, where it has traditionally been vested, and passing it back to the states. And this is just going to, it's going to be chaos for one thing. And whereas this sort of starts in terms of criminal jurisdiction, it's going to spread into other things, whether that's environmental policy or ability to have input into the management of these forests. I will point out that this is a continuation of government oversight, not oversight, well, just usurpation of tribal sovereignty, and that it is through the entire federal, it's just baked through the entire federal system. This only applies to federal tribes, doesn't apply to tribes that are not federally recognized. There are only There are federal tribes in only 35 states. 15 states don't even land in this basket. Of the 573 federal tribes that there are currently in this country, only 36 of them are east of the Mississippi. So it's just a fault-ridden system from the get-go, and it seems to be heading down a road that is not toward balance. It's away from balance, and it's going to protect vested interests, not oversee them. It's going to protect them. So doesn't look good to me. Good question.
Thanks, Rich. So the next one, maybe Zach, I'll give you a opportunity to take a crack at this one. How do you think it's possible that people and the Forest Service seem not to understand the connection between old forests and climate change?
Yeah, that's the million-dollar question there, isn't it? It sure seems like the science is staring them in the face. And of course, as you all probably know, there is a lot of industry-backed science that the Forest Service can pick from to basically suit its own interests. And that is what happens. That is how it works. We have basically dueling peer-reviewed science in the world of forest management. And the Forest Service seeks and in fact creates the science that serves the goals of forest plans that are the kind of driving management plans for national forests. So it is very challenging as the public to get the Forest Service to take seriously other peer-reviewed information that they've chosen to ignore. And it's a great question, and it's not clear to me what the best strategy is to get federal agencies and state agencies to be more inclusive in the information that they review. And so this is an ongoing struggle, and it may take the courts to help with that. And there's gradual change that happens, of course, but I think that's an open-ended question and a really confounding one. So I don't know. Over to you, Len. Do you have anything a little more hopeful to share on that front?
Well, I mean, the thing I think that gives me hope is that both the White House executive order and the secretarial memorandum actually do recognize that forests are an important solution to climate change. I think the thing where we differ is what they need to be protected from in order to maintain their status as carbon sinks. And so, in my mind, if we're acknowledging that these trees are important, we ought to be figuring out how to not cut them down, as well as how to protect them from other, other problems. But the easiest, the thing we have the most control over is whether timber companies are allowed to log somewhere or not. We have a lot less control over drought or what direction the wind blows a fire, those sorts of things. We do have control over, CO2 emissions. That's a whole separate webinar probably. So I think we maybe are agreed on the problem, at least with are certainly agreed on the problem with our friends at the White House and with folks at the Forest Service. And it's the solution that we're currently,
I'll just add in that I think what this also says is that really as a country, and I think we forget this a lot of the time, we do start with our values and then support those values with science that suits our values. And so as a country up until now, we've said logging is more important than having whole forests and whole communities. And we found science that supports that end goal. And what we really need is to make a value judgment as a society that no, in fact, we're going to value forests for something different, and then use the science that's out there to support that decision. But it starts with making a decision. And that's where we really need leadership on the part of elected officials to tell our agencies how they are going to do business. And so I think it just points to the importance of public involvement in all of this and really raising our voices right now.
Right. So we've got two that are they're along the same lines. the idea of transferring national forests to the National Park Service, or a long-term goal of moving the Forest Service out of the USDA and into Department of Interior. And I'll say, for folks that are maybe not familiar with kind of the history of it, the reason that the Forest Service lives under the US Department of Agriculture, whereas other agencies like the National Park Service and Bureau of Land Management live under the Department of Interior, is because trees were, well, and are considered to be they're a cash crop. And so that's what they're doing in the Department of Agriculture. So when you think about it that way, it's not that surprising that we're running up against you know, a history of an agency that has literally a different mission. And I think, Zach, I'll let you speak to this too. I mean, I think that's interesting. I think doing any of that sort of thing likely requires an act of Congress. And I don't feel like we have, I don't think we have the votes or the support for rearranging those agencies right now. And you know, in Ted's question, he said long-term goals. So I think it's an interesting long-term goal. And in the short term, I don't think we have time we certainly don't have time to, you know, and I don't think a path forward with the Congress that's currently in office to do anything like that. But Zach, I think you've got a little bit more direct experience working with the agencies, so you might have some additional thoughts.
Well, I'll make this brief so that Rich can answer this other great question that we have coming to us that's directed to him. But in New England, we have proposals to convert the Green and the White Mountain National Forest to national parks on the table. They've been on the table for quite a while. And I'll just say, I think this is a chance for the Forest Service and the USDA to demonstrate whether or not they can be leaders here in the way that we need them to be. And if they cannot come through modernizing public land management in the way that it's clear we need to, then I think it's on us to take this to Congress and find a better path. So whatever that looks like exactly, but I think this is the Forest Service's chance. And so you know, we're going to have bigger conversations about, you know, who best to put in charge of public land management. And that conversation is not a new one in New England. We've had, you know, this topic of national parks come around since the 1930s for some of these landscapes. So just stop there. But yeah, this is a great question for Rich. You want to read it, Len?
Yes. Yeah, I think this is, so does your organization provide obvious steps for non-Indigenous people on how to change the paradigm perspective of relating to everything in creation as our family? And then goes on to say, I ask for obvious steps as it's clearly a huge struggle for non-Native people to truly comprehend the Indigenous understanding and the interrelationship and responsibility.
Well, that's a big question right there. I'll start by saying that Atui is very small and very new. So we have yet to realize some of these broader goals. And I hope that we can work on some of these questions. I think that at the heart of the matter is the fact that what makes it so difficult to comprehend is that the truism, we don't know what we don't know. And you can only respond to the degree that you are familiar with something. And we simply are not told about how we got to this point where we are so separate from both the Indigenous people and their ways of being. And that is because they do not fit in this paradigm that we are working under of resource extraction and commodification. It doesn't fit. So we don't talk about it. It doesn't work. And so the answer is education. We need to educate the next generations. We need to educate ourselves. At this point in my life, I recognize that old folks don't change much. The changes in those who are yet to come, and that they can develop better habits and ways of being. But we need to learn. We need to learn, and that needs to be put back into the educational system. Well, it's never been there. It needs to be put in there. It was taken out for a reason. And so education is the answer. Our organization is doing what we can in our area, which is basically state of Vermont, specifically southeastern Vermont. And we are going to be around for a long time, and I hope we can continue these conversations. If you want information, go to our website. There's a lot of information there. You'll find a lot of it is political, because this is all political. This is all about power and control, right? That's what we're talking about. Federal agencies, businesses, and that's the way we do business here. It's a business. It's a business. So, and we focus on the people part. We have to, because the people are the ones making all the decisions. But we need to expand that. So thank you.
Thanks, Rich. So I think we'll not get to all of these questions, but I think there's an interesting one here that, well, let's see, there's a whole, I don't know, Zach, are there any of these that you want to jump on in the last 1 minute? Several of them I think are kind of larger existential questions, which I appreciate, but.
Yeah, so there's a great question that I think is important to talk about in terms of the threat of conversion of forest to non-forest versus the way that we are, dealing with the way that we are tending, our forests and being good stewards of our forests. And I just want to say, I think they're both important. And my concern is that in this place that we now call New England, the majority of the conservation organizations in this region, from small local land trusts on up through the largest environmental nonprofits in our region, have almost exclusively focused on stopping the conversion of forest to non-forest. But that's good to a point, right? Because if we are then managing that land for wood products, as we so often do, as we do on most of those lands that are, quote unquote protected or conserved, then you won't end up with restoration of our natural forests. And that is the case today, is that we've done a pretty good job, actually a remarkable job across New England. We've conserved 27% of the New England landscape is off limits from being turned into a strip mall or a parking lot. That's excellent. But only 3% of New England is on a path to actually recovering our native forests. And so we're here at Standing Trees to say, hold on, this is also important. We have to also address this. And I think that's where public lands really have a special role to play. Although, of course, we need to be thinking about ways to move these concepts forward across public and private lands. So I hope that's a helpful answer to that question. Oh, Len, I think you're muted.
Yes, I am. As I say, we're at time and I want to respect people's schedules, but thank you all so much for joining us for this lunchtime webinar. We will, I'll send out a follow-up email to everybody who had RSVP'd with the contact information for all of the panelists so that you can follow up with us. I'm putting my email address into the chat as well. If anybody was not on that RSVP list or didn't get the emails from me with the Zoom link, feel free to send me an email and I'll add you to the list and send you the materials or the contact information and direct you to any resources that you need for follow-up questions. But thank you again, everybody, so much. It's been really great having you all.